Chapter 61. The Spectacular Sight of the You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 61. The Spectacular Sight of the Treasure Pavilion. Translator. Nyo.io Studio Editor. Nyo.io Studio. Zhou Yun, you're awake. Su Lingyun walked over, and beside her were Su Wani and Qiaoer, who were also looking up at the immortal boats in the sky. Brother Zhou Yun. Look, there are so many immortal boats. This is the treasure pavilion, the most prosperous place outside of our 5 sects, that master once said. When Qiaoer saw Zhou Yun waking up from his meditation, she ran over excitedly and threw herself into his arms. The treasure pavilion is so big and magnificent that the Spirit Valley can't compare to it. Su Wani said as she walked over slowly. However, she didn't seem to think that the Spirit Valley was inferior to the treasure pavilion at all. Spirit Valley is a big immortal sect, after all. It's to train its disciples and pursue the great Tao. It's impossible to spend so much spiritual power to whitewash the sect. Su Wani looked at the magnificent treasure pavilion in the sky and shook her head. Besides, the Spirit Valley is not really inferior to the treasure pavilion. Just the spiritual energy consumed by the Spirit Valley sect. Protecting array is not something that the treasure pavilion, which only does business, can compare with. Su Wani said lightly. She turned her face slightly because she had just seen such a spectacle. The entire building was suspended in the air in the treasure pavilion, and countless immortal boats were coming in and out around it. She couldn't help but be dazed for a while. Zhou Yun rubbed Qiaoer's head. He realized that Qiaoer was really becoming more and more clingy to him. Now that Su Lingyun and Su Wani were both here, Qiaoer could actually jump into his arms without any hesitation. Tisk, TSK, no wonder master wanted me to bring you guys out to gain experience. Otherwise, with such an ignorant appearance, wouldn't you be throwing away the prestige of your own people before even fighting in the great competition of the 5 sections? As Su Lingyun spoke, she slowly directed the spiritual boat to fly to the treasure pavilion at the top. Zhou Yun stood up and held Qiaoer's hand. He carefully observed Su Lingyun's movements as she maneuvered the spiritual boat. He found that Su Lingyun seemed to be very skilled in controlling the spiritual boat. She was like a catfish that forced her way into the dozens of spiritual boats around her without even a trace of stagnation. Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun deeply. The immortal boat was a flying spiritual weapon. And it was even bigger. Even if the immortal boat itself already had spiritual stones to provide spiritual energy, the input of spiritual energy would still be sufficient. However, Zhou Yun was certain that the input of spiritual energy would not be much easier than his iron sword, which was on the verge of being scrapped. He suddenly felt that something was amiss. Zhou Yun realized that Su Lingyun's actions had been a little strange since the Spirit Valley. For example, why did she make a trip to Fenghua City? Although he had initially believed Su Lingyun's words, and Su Wani and Qiaoer had indeed wanted to see it, he was still a little worried. But now that he thought about it, Zhou Yun realized that something was wrong. It was only autumn, and there was still half a year before spring. No matter how powerful Fenghua City was, it was also impossible to see spring so soon. Moreover, Zhou Yun remembered that they were still walking around Fenghua City. Su Lingyun had no intention of strolling around the city. She was just walking around blindly. Until Su Lingyun suddenly pointed to the sky and said that the guests had arrived. In other words, Su Lingyun already knew that heretic cultivators would come to find her. Zhou Yun mumbled to himself, and maybe she knows that those heretic cultivators came here specifically to find me. In order to help me get rid of Meng Feiang, she didn't come to the treasure pavilion directly, but stopped in Fenghua City. Zhou Yun slowly sorted out his thoughts and realized that Su Lingyun seemed to be smarter than he had imagined. Even Zhou Yun had never thought that Su Lingyun, who appeared to be a little silly in front of him, would actually think so deeply behind his back. Another 1,000 meters and you'll be in the territory of the treasure pavilion. You can reach out and see the fluctuations of spiritual energy around the treasure pavilion. Su Lingyun, who was looking ahead and controlling the flying boat to avoid the flying boats, suddenly turned her head and said to Zhou Yun, "Spiritual energy." Hearing that, Zhou Yun followed Su Lingyun's order and was about to reach out his hand to feel the density of the spiritual energy outside through the spiritual energy barrier of the immortal boat. However, Zhou Yun was a little surprised. He originally thought that Su Lingyun would have a hard time controlling the spiritual boat to travel through such a dense area. He didn't expect that Su Lingyun would still have the energy to turn around and talk to them. Is Su Lingyun hiding her strength? Her true strength is even more powerful than I thought. Zhou Yun recalled the spiritual corpse and the black-robed man he had met earlier. He had indeed used all his strength to slash out the heaven-splitting sword to reverse the situation. However, he didn't see Su Lingyun's battle. At that time, the sky was filled with black fog, and Su Lingyun was fighting with the black-robed man in the black fog. He didn't have the chance to discover Su Lingyun's attack method. "We're here. Reach out!" Su Lingyun shouted. Zhou Yun came back to his senses. He didn't have time to continue thinking about Su Lingyun's matter. He, Su Wani, and Xiao reached out to the outside of the spiritual energy barrier of the immortal boat at the same time. This is such dense spiritual energy. Zhou Yun's hand had just reached outside the spiritual energy barrier when he was shocked by the density of the spiritual energy outside. This was because there was a large amount of spiritual qi in the treasure pavilion's territory. It was far more than the dead spiritual qi in Fenghua City. The two seemed to form a contrast that was like heaven and earth. No, this spiritual power is even more than the spiritual power in the Spirit Valley. If I didn't receive the reward for becoming a glory disciple, I wouldn't even have the chance to enjoy such a spiritual energy environment for cultivation. Zhou Yun frowned. He did not understand why there was so much spiritual energy outside the treasure pavilion. Even the cave abodes of some elders had the same density of spiritual energy. They also didn't understand why Su Lingyun wanted them to do this. Could there be some hidden meaning behind it? Zhou Yun realized that after leaving the Spirit Valley, this trash-discipled senior sister who only knew how to drink seemed to have changed. Is the spiritual energy very strong? First of all, this is the treasure pavilion, and we have to receive guests. If we don't have enough spiritual energy, how can we attract the guests to turn back? Su Lingyun saw their surprised expressions, nodded, and continued, "Second, in addition to the treasure pavilion's generous use of spiritual power, there is another reason. The treasure pavilion has Venerable Xuanling." Venerable Xuanling. Zhou Yun felt that he could understand the use of this person just by hearing the name. However, in this world where spiritual power was exhausted, could anyone really find spiritual power? Don't doubt it. It's because Venerable Xuanling really exists. Su Lingyun smiled and pointed at the most magnificent building in the treasure pavilion. There, he's right there. There's also a quote by Xuanling. Do you want to hear it? Su Lingyun tilted her head and smiled. There is a legend in the mortal world. Xuanling searches for immortals and fate, akin to a dream-like person. Chapter 62. The Mysterious Shadow. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 62. The Mysterious Shadow. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. When Zhou Yun heard this, he carefully considered the meaning of this sentence. There is a legend in the mortal world. Xuanling searches for immortals and fate, akin to a dream-like person. Zhou Yun thought about it for a long time, but he still couldn't figure it out. After all, he couldn't get to know someone with just a sentence. Beside them, Su Wani and Xiao were also deep in thought. Xiao touched her head, unable to figure it out. She looked at Zhou Yun. Zhou Yun shook his head. After all, he had only entered the cultivation world for a year. This Venerable Xuanling clearly did not look like a young man. He was probably an old monster who had been famous for a long time. Don't even think about it. It's just an exaggeration. It's also a publicity stunt. Su Lingyun couldn't help but laugh when she saw Zhou Yun and the others thinking hard. After all, as the largest auction house within the 5 sects, the Spirit Treasure Rare Goods Sales Office definitely has its own advantages. This place was one of them. The legendary Venerable Xuanling, who can find a place with spiritual energy in this world that is lacking in spiritual energy, is also one. Su Lingyun explained. But I think it's just marketing. Actually, that Venerable Xuanling is said to be a mysterious person wearing a face concealing spiritual artifact. He often loiters around the treasure pavilion and is bored to death. As Su Lingyun spoke, she waved her hand, and the spiritual boat that had been flying for a long time steadily stopped in the treasure pavilion. Keep. Su Lingyun kept the spiritual boat. Only then did Zhou Yun realize that they had arrived at the treasure pavilion. On the treasure pavilion, the huge buildings extended into the distance. There was a sea of people on the pavilion, even more than the number of people Zhou Yun had seen in Fenghua City. And what shocked Zhou Yun the most was that everyone here was a cultivator. At a glance, the lowest was a foundation establishment cultivator. A few Qi cultivators were also slowly walking forward with a group of people in front and behind them. One look and you could tell that they were disciples of large aristocratic families. The treasure pavilion is divided into 3 areas. The treasure hunting area, the foundation building area, and the auction area. Su Lingyun took a few maps from a servant. It's the 3 places above. Su Lingyun pointed at a few buildings of different colors. As she spoke, she suddenly lowered her voice, but I heard that in the core area, there is an area specially open for Golden Core Grand Cultivators. If I wasn't stuck in the Golden Core stage, I would be able to show you guys if this place is a legend. Zhou Yun looked at the buildings on the map. He realized that the further east he went, the more magnificent the buildings became. He could even see a tall tower. There was a pearl on top of the tower, which shone on the entire treasure pavilion, making it as bright as day even in the dark. Zhou Yun looked at the building and tapped on it with his hand. He then looked at the foundation establishment area and the treasure hunting area that he was curious about. You guys can walk around upstairs for a while. I'll use this time to help you buy tickets to the next auction. Su Lingyun waved her hand and was about to turn around and leave. Senior Sister Su. Zhou Yun called out to Su Lingyun. That was because he realized that after they had arrived at the treasure pavilion, the surrounding gazes seemed to fall on them from time to time. No, to be more precise, Zhou Yun realized that all of them were looking at Xiao and Su Wani. Even Su Lingyun was being spied on by many cultivators. Zhou Yun held Xiao's hand. Xiao's face turned red. She did not expect Zhou Yun to suddenly hold her hand. Xiao's body went soft, and she leaned toward Zhou Yun. Tisk, Zhou Yun furrowed his brows. He had held Xiao's hand to prevent any accidents from happening, but now he realized that there were even more people staring at them. Be calm. Don't attack, if you attack you will be beheaded. Even if the 5 great sects were to come, it wouldn't be of much use. Su Lingyun didn't even look back as she waved her hand and walked away. Zhou Yun was taken aback. What did that mean? He looked around and found that the cultivators who were peeking in the dark had all turned their heads away. Few of them wanted to look at each other. Junior brother Zhou Yun, there are some notes on the map. There seems to be a golden core cultivator guarding every pavilion. Su Wani pointed at the map and then at a pavilion not far from them. Zhou Yun could clearly feel his heart throb from the top of the pavilion. He had the same feeling when he faced the elders of the Spirit Valley. 13. No, it's 20.3. After Zhou Yun counted the number on the map, he found that this treasure pavilion, which was mainly used for trading, actually had 20.3 golden core grand cultivators guarding it. Sister just said that we should take a look around the treasure pavilion while she's away. Maybe we can find our own opportunities. Su Wani closed the map and said. Brother Zhou Yun. Let's go to the treasure hunting area. I believe that Brother Zhou Yun is the luckiest. You'll definitely find the best opportunity. Qiao's eyes lit up when she heard the word treasure hunting area. She wrapped her arms around Zhou Yun and said. Zhou Yun realized that with Qiao swaying, not only could he not stand it, but he could also feel the fierceness in the eyes of the people around him. That line of sight seemed to be able to penetrate him. Zhou Yun sighed. Qiao was indeed the Spirit Valley's signature disciple, not to mention that senior sister Su Wani was around. The pressure he felt in the treasure pavilion, where even the weakest cultivator was at the foundation establishment stage, was even more terrifying than in the Spirit Valley. Come, let's go to the treasure hunting area. Zhou Yun had refined quite a few elixirs in Spirit Valley, so he thought that if he really came across something good, he could exchange it with the other party and auction the rest at the treasure pavilion. Zhou Yun believed that even without considering the value of the medicinal ingredients, just the degree of perfection of a perfect tier pill would cause many alchemists to risk their lives to buy it for research. Although Zhou Yun didn't expect to compete with Su Lingyun in terms of wealth, he didn't want to rely on others for everything. Just as Zhou Yun led his group to the treasure hunting area, another group of people came from the opposite side. Each of them wore a veil on their face. This veil seemed to be able to block others' vision in divine sense, making it impossible to see their faces clearly. Each of them was wearing a thick black robe that covered their body. Ordinary people couldn't even tell each other's gender by their bodies. Akin to a dream-like person. Zhou Yun was stunned for a moment. Wasn't this venerable Xuanling that Su Lingyun had just mentioned? However, why were there so many of them? Could it be that the treasure pavilion was wholesale? Just as Zhou Yun said that, the group of black-robed men who had been walking straight suddenly stopped. One of the black-robed men raised his eyes and looked at Zhou Yun. A perfect foundation establishment. He's only in the early stage foundation establishment, but he's already mastered the great stage of sword intent and the great stage of sword control technique. The black-robed man waved his hand and one of the black men took out a form and handed it to him. On the form was Zhou Yun's information. Interesting. I didn't expect the Spirit Valley to have such a heaven's favorite. It seems that the situation is unpredictable. The black-robed man mumbled and continued walking. He brushed past Zhou Yun. Chapter 63. Venerable Xuanling, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 63. Venerable Xuanling Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. Zhou Yun watched as the group of black-robed men slowly walked past him and went straight to the other side until they disappeared. Brother Zhou Yun, where are you looking at? Is there someone there? Qiao stopped. She was curious as to why Zhou Yun had suddenly stopped. Junior brother Zhou Yun, did you discover something? Su Wani was also very curious as to why Zhou Yun had stopped. She looked in the direction of Zhou Yun's line of sight but did not find anything special. Zhou Yun noticed Qiao and Su Wani's confusion. He realized that the two of them did not seem to have noticed the group of black-robed men. You guys didn't see them. Zhou Yun suddenly felt his scalp go numb and a chill run down his spine. Hundreds of foundation establishment cultivators were present, and even a few golden core grand cultivators. They didn't even notice the group of black-robed people who had just passed by. Could it be that what he had just seen was an illusion? Zhou Yun looked at Qiao and Su Wani. He realized that their expressions did not seem to be fake. Besides, Qiao would not lie to him. Junior brother Zhou Yun, what did you see? If he's a cultivator, describe his appearance to us. We might know something. When Su Wani saw Zhou Yun's serious expression, she also became serious. That's right, brother Zhou Yun. Perhaps it's the old monsters from those sections. Xiao said. She tried to look in the direction that Zhou Yun had been looking at, but she still could not see anything. No, I'm fine. I might have seen it wrong. I thought I saw senior sister Su Lingyun just now. Zhou Yun suppressed his suspicion when he saw the two girls so worried about him. Alright, let's go to the treasure hunting area. I don't think senior sister Su Lingyun will come back so soon. Let's go and find a treasure. Zhou Yun didn't want to let the topic continue. He forcefully changed the topic. Alright, brother Zhou Yun. Xiao was about to say something, but her gaze became firm. She held Zhou Yun's hand and followed him without asking anything. Su Wani saw that the two of them had no intention of continuing, so she could only stop. Zhou Yun forcefully suppressed the matter of the black-robed men to the bottom of his heart and walked towards the treasure hunting area. The treasure hunting area was an area that was not divided into levels. One could find foundation establishment or even golden core stage heavenly materials and earthly treasures, secret manuals, and spiritual weapons here. It was also possible that he had obtained an ordinary stone with a strange appearance. There were many opportunities here, but there were also many failures. Some people were tired of walking and looking for treasure, so they went to the side to get tickets from the servant boy and set up a stall. There were also people who started to look for treasures in high spirits after selling their items. Zhou Yun still had quite a few perfect-tier pills in his possession. However, the rarer something was, the more valuable it would be. He did not plan to sell them so quickly. Just as Zhou Yun was about to go on a treasure hunt, Xiao suddenly broke free from his grasp. Brother Zhou Yun, there's a treasure hunting area for female cultivators over there. I'll be back with senior sister Wani. Xiao said apologetically, then pulled Su Wani and ran in the other direction. Zhou Yun looked at Xiao and Su Wani. He realized that the two of them seemed to be whispering to each other. Forget it, treasure hunting is a matter of fate. If we separate, our fate might be greater. Naturally, Zhou Yun would not follow Xiao. Furthermore, Xiao had already said so he would not go and invite rebuff. But I'm just looking for treasure. Zhou Yun was a little excited. He never thought that he would one day be able to step into a treasure hunting area. Zhou Yun rubbed his palms together, wondering if he could find an opportunity, such as the old grandpa in the ring. The spiritual energy in this area was too scarce. Even with the system's help, Zhou Yun could only cultivate in the Spirit Valley. However, it's really hard to find an opportunity. Zhou Yun passed by more than a dozen stalls. He realized that most of the stalls were selling scrap metal. Not to mention good stuff, there were not many that even had spiritual energy. If it wasn't for the fact that one had to pay an entrance fee to enter the treasure pavilion, Zhou Yun would have suspected that these people were here to freeload spiritual qi. After passing by more than a dozen stalls, Zhou Yun lost interest. He had already changed from the excitement of treasure hunting to the current boredom. Am I really unlucky? I didn't find the immortal encounter that belonged to me. Zhou Yun stopped in his tracks. He turned around and saw that the stalls were still there. From time to time, people would stop to look and buy. However, the things he bought were all things that Zhou Yun did not care about. It was because they were all fragments of spiritual weapons or incomplete secret manuals. There were a few good spiritual weapons, and their prices were as high as a dozen spiritual stones, completely exceeding the original price of the spiritual weapons. Oh, is this your first time here? What do you think? Pick one from me and I'll tell you the spell to leak the treasure. The stall owner in front of Zhou Yun suddenly said. He looked very young, not much different from Zhou Yun. He wore an ordinary gray robe, but he was already in the late-stage foundation establishment. I am from the 5 sects and my nickname is the famous Lai Yenshan. I'm an authentic disciple with a good reputation and don't cheat people. Many returning customers come to buy things from me. Brother, please believe me. By one, you won't lose out or be fooled. Seeing that Zhou Yun had not left, Lai Yenshan spoke even more forcefully. Zhou Yun looked at his stall. There was a bottle of pills, a few spiritual weapon fragments, and many secret manuals. He definitely wouldn't even look at these things before he turned around and left. However, after hearing Lai Yenshan's words, Zhou Yun was slightly tempted. Could there really be a secret to treasure hunting that he did not know about? One hidden, 2 wealthy families, and 3 sisters. Brother, do you want to know this slip of the tongue? Come, by one. If you don't lose out, I'll tell you where the opportunities are in this treasure hunting area. Lai Yenshan was like a fly rubbing its hands as he kept pointing at his stall. Zhou Yun squatted down. He wanted to reach out for the spiritual weapon but was suddenly stopped by Lai Yenshan. Brother, don't you know the rules? Your eyes move but your hands stay still. If you've touched them all, then wouldn't there be no fun in treasure hunting? Lai Yenshan pointed at the small text on the map. The small text stated that before purchasing, one could only look but not touch, and one could not use spiritual sense. This is terrible. Lai Yenshan suddenly cried out and he quickly kept his map. However, Zhou Yun narrowed his eyes and took out his map. Sure enough, below the rules, there were also secret notes about treasure hunting techniques. In addition to many techniques, the incantations of the 2 hidden noble families and the 3 sisters were also included. Brother, we are not. Lai Yenshan still wanted to quibble, but the next moment, a few people in the treasure pavilion's uniform rushed out from the other side. It's over there. Last time, he said that he was the waterproof pavilion and that his nickname was Sky Bird. That scammer scammed me of so many spiritual stones. Under the leadership of a cultivator, the people of the treasure pavilion surrounded him. Damn it, he actually reacted so quickly. I'm running. Lai Yenshan's body ran out like a monkey's. He didn't even take the items on the ground and threw them away. What a good fellow. Zhou Yun's eyes narrowed. He had almost been fooled. However, the secret of this chant is that it's also a person wearing a black robe and a veil. Zhou Yun looked at the incantation and recalled the group of black-robed men he had just met. Chapter 64. The Furious Su Lingyun. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 64. The Furious Su Lingyun. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. The 1 hidden, 2 wealthy families, and 3 sisters, mentioned in the incantation referred to different stall owners. Among them, the 3 sisters were mysterious cultivators who often appeared in the female cultivators' area. Their stalls often had some beauty pills and other medicinal pills that female cultivators were after. As for the 2 rich families, they would appear from time to time in the treasure hunting area. They were rich, but their 2 unfilial children would spend their time and drink to obtain spiritual stones. They would steal their family's treasures and sell them in exchange for spiritual stones. As a result, these 2 wealthy families were deeply loved by ordinary cultivators. Many cultivators had brought large amounts of spiritual stones with them, waiting for the appearance of these 2 wealthy families. However, in this chant, if the first 5 people were ordinary people who could be seen from time to time, then the last secret, the black-robed man with a veil, was not seen by everyone. It seemed to be a matter of fate. It was said that the black-robed man set up a stall. If you were not fated, you would not be able to see them even if you passed by them. However, if they were fated, they would be able to spot their position among the many stalls. Furthermore, their stalls were all selling spiritual weapons of foundation establishment and above, and there were even quite a few rare cultivation techniques. Most importantly, the black-robed man didn't take the money and gave it away for free. See, this made countless cultivators rush like a flock of ducks, wandering around the treasure hunting area to find this secret. These black-robed men are so similar to the group I just saw. Zhou Yun thought back and realized that the group of people he had just seen was one of the secrets mentioned on the map. It seems that senior sister Su Lingyun is not entirely right. Not all legends are spread to attract customers. This black-robed man really exists. And they're in piles. Zhou Yun even suspected that he had seen an extremely rare secret group of people opening their stalls. If I knew I would meet them, I would have gone up directly. Wouldn't I be rich then? Zhou Yun felt that he had missed out on 100 million yuan. After all, the price of a black-robed man's stall was enough to make a foundation establishment cultivator go crazy. He had just seen a bunch of them. Even a golden core grand cultivator would go crazy. Zhou Yun turned his head to look at his surroundings. He might be able to see the black-robed man again. This time, he wasn't afraid at all. He even had some hope. Hey, you're just looking around. This is your first time, right? The voice came from beside Zhou Yun. It was from the stall where Lai Yenshan was just now. Zhou Yun stopped and looked around. He looked at Lai Yenshan's stall and was stunned. Unknowingly, Lai Yenshan's stall had changed owners, and the owner of that stall was the black-robed man that Zhou Yun was looking for. You are that one hidden. Zhou Yun said with uncertainty. He realized that the items on the stall had also turned into immortal boats with spiritual energy floating around, body armor, and a few secret manuals. What do you mean by one hidden? I have a name, after all. That's right, I'm that one, Venerable Xuanling. Venerable Xuanling sat on the ground with his face covered, making it impossible to tell if he was a male or female from his voice. I really found the one hidden, and it's the mysterious Venerable Xuanling that senior sister Su Lingyun mentioned. Zhou Yun became excited. If the legendary Venerable Xuanling was real, then wouldn't the matter of him giving away a spiritual weapon and a secret manual for free be true as well? Kid, let me correct you a little, said Venerable Xuanling. What? Don't tell me I still have to pay. Zhou Yun frowned. If he had to pay, the spiritual stones he had on him would not be enough to buy the things on the stall. No, these are all free gifts for you. Or rather, I'm the one who's in a hurry to give it to you. Venerable Xuanling said seriously. He wrapped up the stall and placed it in Zhou Yun's hands. All of this was not noticed by the people around. Not only did no one see Venerable Xuanling, but they also did not see Zhou Yun's actions. It was as if Zhou Yun had also turned invisible. Give it to me for free. Since that's the case, what's wrong with that? Zhou Yun was taken aback. He didn't think that he would really give it to him. At that moment, he thought that Venerable Xuanling was going back on his word. Wrong means wrong. You must know that you weren't the one who found me. Venerable Xuanling corrected him. I'm the one who went to great lengths to find you. You were looking for me. Zhou Yun furrowed his brows. In an instant, he thought of many things that he had, things that were worth fighting over. One was the perfect tier alchemy technique, and the other was the system. Zhou Yun did not take the treasure. He cautiously took half a step back. The setting sun sword intent on his body slowly circulated and rays of red light spread. Zhou Yun entered a state of combat. He even slowly touched his waist, where there was a voice transmission talisman used to contact Su Lingyun. Wait. This place forbade the use of spiritual power in combat. You don't want to attract the attention of the people around you, do you? Seeing that Zhou Yun was about to use his sword intent, Venerable Xuanling quickly called out. Zhou Yun did not blindly retract his sword intent. He was still looking cautiously at Venerable Xuanling. If they were to really fight, he would rather use his sword intent to attract the attention of all the cultivators present. Sigh, I'll just say it. You, Zhou Yun. A disciple of Spirit Valley who had just entered the sect for a year, who was originally unknown, suddenly had a sudden burst of talent. In a short time, you entered the legendary 10th layer of Qi cultivation, followed by perfect foundation establishment, the great stage of sword intent, and the great stage of sword control technique. You're a true heaven's favorite. Venerable Xuanling gave Zhou Yun's information in its entirety as he sized him up. Furthermore, your looks are outstanding. You can be said to be the most talented prodigy in the 5 sects in the past few hundred years. When Zhou Yun heard what Venerable Xuanling said, his heart was in a state of shock. At the same time, he became even more vigilant. Su Lingyun was the only one who knew that he had learned the sword control technique. The spiritual corpse had been killed long ago, and the heretic cultivator behind it was hiding somewhere to recuperate. And this Venerable Xuanling actually knew all about him. Ahem, I'll say it again. You're heaven's favorite, a true heaven's favorite. I'm here to find heaven's favorites and give them the cultivation resources they need. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw the bag containing a large number of valuable items to Zhou Yun and disappeared. Zhou Yun took the bag and looked at the disappearing Venerable Xuanling. In the end, he gave up on the idea of throwing the bag away. If it really didn't work, he was really afraid that there was something wrong with these things. He could sell the things inside and exchange them for spiritual stones. Oh. I haven't seen it for half a day and you only bought this thing. It doesn't look like much. Su Lingyun's voice suddenly came from behind Zhou Yun. She looked at the old bag in Zhou Yun's hand and thought that he had been tricked. She couldn't help but laugh. Don't worry, it's fine if you get scammed. It's just a few spiritual stones. I'll help you bid for a good spiritual sword later. Su Lingyun waved the ticket in her hand and comforted Zhou Yun. No, senior sister Su, didn't you say that Venerable Xuanling was just a story to attract people? Zhou Yun shook the bag in his hand. That's right, why? It can't be that you've met him, right? Ha ha ha, this is so funny. Su Lingyun covered her stomach and laughed. I met Venerable Xuanling. Zhou Yun opened the bag and revealed a superior defensive numinous treasure. Su Lingyun's laughter suddenly stopped. Her expression suddenly turned serious. Chapter 65. Zhou Yun's Guess. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 65. Zhou Yun's Guest Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio, you've met Venerable Xuanling. Su Lingyun stopped smiling and asked Zhou Yun in a serious tone. It was Zhou Yun's first time seeing such a serious Su Lingyun. Even when she was facing sect leader Ling Qingyun and surrounded by heretic cultivators, Su Lingyun had never been so serious. Quickly say it. When did this happen? Where is he? Su Lingyun walked forward and grabbed Zhou Yun's clothes, lifting him up. Zhou Yun felt like he was being targeted by a ferocious beast. The huge force on his chest made him unable to resist at all. At this moment, Zhou Yun realized that Su Lingyun didn't seem to have the dejection that she had when they were alone, and she wasn't as gentle as she was when facing outsiders. All that was left was anger. In fact, she was so angry that it made people feel fear. From Su Lingyun's petite body, there was a terrifying aura that made Zhou Yun's heart palpitate. Zhou Yun used all of his spiritual energy to resist, but he could only block Su Lingyun's hand. However, this was only Su Lingyun's physical strength. She didn't even use her spiritual power. Zhou Yun was dumbfounded. Was this still the same Su Lingyun who had been surrounded and injured by the heretic cultivators and had asked him for help? Why did Su Lingyun, who was so powerful, ask him for help? Zhou Yun felt that he was not as invincible as he had imagined. Just as Zhou Yun was using his spiritual energy to defend against Su Lingyun's attack and was even prepared to use the setting sun sword intent to defend himself, a cough sounded throughout the entire treasure hunting area. Cough cough. This voice was clearly very soft, but it was deafening. Zhou Yun's head quivered from the impact. Little Su Lingyun, I didn't expect that after so many years, you still couldn't hold back when we meet again, an old man on the pavilion said softly. He was one of the Golden Core Grand Cultivators who guarded the place. Humph! Su Lingyun came back to her senses and put Zhou Yun down with an apologetic look in her eyes. Senior Hsien, thank you. After saying that, Su Lingyun walked towards the exit of the treasure hunting area. Zhou Yun stood still for a few seconds. Keep up, the auction is about to start. Su Lingyun turned her head and shouted, then continued to walk forward. Zhou Yun picked up his bag and followed Su Lingyun. He had many questions in his mind. How powerful was Su Lingyun? Why did she become like this the moment she heard about Venerable Xuanling? Moreover, what exactly was the devil in her heart? Zhou Yun followed Su Lingyun. The two of them did not speak until they met a servant. The two of them then followed the attendant into the auction house. When the two of them entered the auction house, Zhou Yun realized that they had already entered a private room. The concentration of spiritual qi in this private room was even higher than that of his cave abode. Furthermore, there were many spiritual fruits to enjoy. Zhou Yun sat beside Su Lingyun. He didn't have the chance to speak, nor did he know how to. The two of them remained silent. When the auction began, a black-robed man with a veil over his face walked up and began the auction. Zhou Yun was stunned. He's not Venerable Xuanling, don't let your imagination run wild. Su Lingyun finally spoke. She picked up a spiritual fruit and ate it indifferently. There are many people like that in the treasure pavilion. They are in charge of running the secret affairs of the treasure pavilion in many places. It also includes setting up stalls, auctions, and defense. Su Lingyun explained the operation of the treasure pavilion in detail while Zhou Yun listened to her. He didn't interrupt Su Lingyun's words. He was also very curious about the background of this Venerable Xuanling. However, even though they're all dressed the same, there's only one Venerable Xuanling. And only he would call himself Venerable Xuanling. Su Lingyun paused for a moment and looked at Zhou Yun. Zhou Yun nodded. The black-robed man he had met had indeed called himself Venerable Xuanling. Do you know why I'm looking for him? As Su Lingyun spoke, she seemed to recall something. She tilted her head to one side, full of pain. Zhou Yun chose to remain silent. He could only be a spectator. That's because my fiancé also met Venerable Xuanling. 5 years after he met Venerable Xuanling, he disappeared from this world without a trace. Within the 5 sects, a large amount of manpower was invested to find him again. Su Lingyun explained in detail, her tone revealing extreme sadness. Junior brother Zhou Yun, you met Venerable Xuanling. Did you also disappear? Su Lingyun smiled faintly, but she was so lonely that it made one's heart ache. Do you know what Venerable Xuanling would say? Zhou Yun recalled that Venerable Xuanling had said that he had specially come to find him. I don't know. Back then, my fiancé went into closed-door cultivation after he met Venerable Xuanling. After that, he came out to train and disappeared without a trace. Su Lingyun said. He said that he came here to find me. He even said that I'm a heaven's favorite of the 5 sects, and he wants to give these things to me. As Zhou Yun spoke, he pointed at the bag on the table. He opened the bag. It was a few magical technique manuals and a defensive spiritual weapon. These were the items he was currently lacking. Zhou Yun had already cultivated the spiritual qi art to the extreme. Moreover, he was waiting for Su Lingyun to help him buy a spiritual sword. In other words, Venerable Xuanling already knew everything about him and had even helped him to make up for the missing cultivation techniques, dharma spells, and defensive spiritual weapons. It's possible that he really wants me to become stronger. And when facing the powerful me, he must have a purpose. Zhou Yun guessed as he looked at the bag. For example, make me disappear and go to a certain place. Zhou Yun was trying to guess the reason for Su Lingyun's fiancé's disappearance. Upon hearing this, Su Lingyun's dead eyes suddenly lit up. She stared at Zhou Yun with a burning gaze. All this information is true. Su Lingyun was very nervous. She was too afraid that the information was fake. You're saying that he might not be dead yet, but was taken to some place. Zhou Yun looked into Su Lingyun's eyes. He knew that it was just his guess, but he didn't have the heart to break Su Lingyun's hope, so he could only nod. Senior sister, wait for me to grow stronger. If it's really as I've guessed, I believe that Venerable Xuanling will find me very soon. Zhou Yun still decided to give Su Lingyun some hope. After all, you've also said that I'm so talented that I make you feel disgusted. Zhou Yun smiled. Arg. That's right. You bastard junior brother. Su Lingyun seemed to have found hope. Then junior brother, you have to work harder. After all, my fiancé is a genius. Su Lingyun said with a smile. She suddenly looked at the auction house. In this case, it seems that the spiritual sword I want to buy for junior brother must be a peerless good sword. Su Lingyun rubbed her hands in anticipation. Zhou Yun's eyes lit up. He didn't expect that comforting Su Lingyun would actually bring him benefits. Chapter 66. The Mystery of the Auction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 66. The Mystery of the Auction. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. All the lights in the auction house were turned off, and only one black-robed man was holding an item on the stage. Next to the black-robed man, 5 light pillars emitting spiritual energy were emitting a moonlight-like light, shining on the object in his hand. All guests, please take note that this is a spiritual artifact found in a large sect that has been destroyed for 300 years. It is said that this spiritual artifact was hidden in a secret place in the sect leader's palace at that time. It is very likely to be the sect-protecting spiritual weapon. The black-robed man raised the object, allowing the light to focus on its body. As soon as the sect-protecting spiritual weapon was revealed, everyone present couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Even Zhou Yun could not help but look at the spiritual weapon. He had once seen Ling Qingyun use the Spirit Valley's sect-protecting spiritual weapon during the sect's initiation ceremony. With every movement of Ling Qingyun, the sky changed and dark clouds rolled. It was as if a real immortal had descended. At that time, Zhou Yun had been shocked by the power of the Spirit Valley's sect-protecting spiritual weapon. Unexpectedly, the first item up for auction in the treasure pavilion was a spiritual weapon of the same level as the spiritual weapon of the Spirit Valley. Although it's a good gimmick as the first opening auction item, don't be fooled so easily. Su Lingyun didn't even look at the spiritual weapon that had attracted everyone's attention. She was slowly going through the list of auction items issued by the auction house. A true sect-protecting spiritual weapon must be personally watched over by the sect leaders of each generation and continuously nurtured with spiritual energy. Only then will it continue to grow stronger, even breaking through its limits and advancing in quality. Su Lingyun put down the list of items and pointed at the spiritual weapon. This spiritual weapon might have been comparable to Spirit Valley's sect-protecting spiritual weapon 300 years ago, but after 300 years, it can't compare to my sword without the nourishment of spiritual energy. Su Lingyun touched the sword in her hand. Zhou Yun nodded, not fully understanding. He realized that in this world, not only would cultivators lose their cultivation after leaving the sect due to the depletion of spiritual energy, even spiritual weapons would lose their cultivation. He was a little disappointed. If that was the case, then when he entered the land of opportunity in the future or even found the place of death of some powerful being, the peerless sword he picked up might become scrap metal. Zhou Yun suddenly thought that if he really had a ring, even if there was a powerful old man living in it, he would probably die because of the loss of spiritual energy in this world. Zhou Yun realized that spiritual energy was the foundation of everything. If Spirit Valley's spiritual energy was exhausted one day, then even if he cultivated to the late stage foundation establishment and became a golden core grand cultivator, wouldn't he slowly lose his spiritual energy and become immortal? During the battle with the heretic cultivators, Zhou Yun released all of his spiritual energy and slashed out with the heaven-splitting sword, wiping out all the heretic cultivators in one fell swoop. However, he also fell into a state where he lost all his spiritual energy. At that time, Zhou Yun felt that he was not much stronger than an ordinary person. It was as if he had returned to the time when he had just entered the sect a year ago, or in the previous world, when he was still on the blue planet and was just an ordinary person. Although I don't have to worry about the lack of spiritual power of the heavens and the earth now, I might have to think about how I can prevent myself from using up all my spiritual power if I need to fight in the outside world again. Zhou Yun became alert. In the previous battle, he had been too eager for success. Although he had eliminated the heretic cultivator, he had also fallen into a state of no spiritual power. If Su Lingyun had not been around, he would not have been able to leave Fenghua City after losing his spiritual power. He might even die in the wilderness and become the first foundation cultivator to die from a lack of spiritual energy. Just as Zhou Yun was thinking hard about how to avoid running out of spiritual energy during the battle, Su Lingyun clapped her hands and attracted his attention. The lack of spiritual energy is not something a little foundation establishment cultivator like you should think about. Su Lingyun threw a spiritual fruit to Zhou Yun and pointed at herself. Don't worry. I'll teach you how to fight in the outside world. This is one of the reasons why Master asked me to bring you out. After all, it's been a long time since the spiritual power of the heavens and earth has been so scarce. Over the past 1,000 years, we've found many ways to avoid dying from a lack of spiritual power in the outside world. Su Lingyun said as she patted Zhou Yun's shoulder. Su Lingyun was very satisfied that Zhou Yun was able to recover from his first battle so quickly without being arrogant or impatient and had found the factors that she needed to pay attention to. She finally understood why Venerable Xuanling had found Zhou Yun. Perhaps, Zhou Yun was really heaven's favorite. Zhou Yun nodded. After listening to Su Lingyun's words, he didn't continue to argue. After all, what was more important now was the items in the auction house. He really needed a spiritual sword to increase his strength. If he had a good spiritual sword before, it would not have been so difficult to kill the spiritual corpse. However, other than the sect-protecting spiritual weapon, the rest of the items were all treasures that were needed for qi refining or foundation establishment. Zhou Yun was not interested in these things. What he needed was something that could increase his strength. This is the list. There will be 3 spiritual swords in this auction. They are the Blue Water Sword, the Falling Wind Sword, and the Thicket Rain Sword. Su Lingyun passed the list of the auction to Zhou Yun. Zhou Yun took it and took a look. He discovered that other than the last sword that was displayed as an unknown, the 3 spiritual swords were all at the back of the auction list. Especially the Thicket Rain Sword, it was ranked second to last in the entire auction. However, Zhou Yun frowned when he read the introduction about the Thicket Rain Sword. That was because the Thicket Rain Sword was a water attribute spiritual sword. Although the Thicket Rain Sword is the most valuable and the most powerful, it's not suitable for you. Your sword intent isn't suitable for the Thicket Rain Sword. Therefore, I suggest that you consider the Falling Wind Sword. Although the Setting Sun Sword intent and the Falling Wind Sword are not very compatible, with the completion of your sword intent and the great stage of sword control technique, the Falling Wind Sword will still be able to give you a huge increase in combat power. Su Lingyun was helping Zhou Yun to analyze the situation. She knew that there wasn't much time left until the 5 sects tournament, and the auction held by the Treasure Pavilion wouldn't be held every day. Moreover, she could still find rare and suitable spiritual swords from the auction. It's okay, Senior Sister Su, please bid for the Thicket Rain Sword for me. Zhou Yun's furrowed brows suddenly relaxed as he read the introduction of the Thicket Rain Sword. Perhaps for others, cultivating sword intent would require thousands of days of bitter cultivation. However, he had the system, so he could enter the state of enlightenment at any time. If he got his hands on the Thicket Rain sword, he would only have cultivated the Thicket Rain sword intent for a few days. Alright, we'll do as you say, Su Lingyun glanced at Zhou Yun. She didn't ask why but agreed with Zhou Yun's choice. Very quickly, the auction items were sold one by one, and the auction reached its climax. The second last item was brought up. At this moment, the entire auction house was shining with a golden light that was even brighter than the silver moonlight. The Thicket Rain sword was carried up with a golden glow. Chapter 67. Sudden change. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 67. Sudden change. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. This Thicket Rain sword was forged by a master from a foreign land because of its high quality and its unique nature. This spiritual sword is defined as a top-notch spiritual sword that can be used by late-stage foundation establishment cultivators or early-stage golden core grand cultivators. The black-robed man placed the Thicket Rain sword, which was shining with a golden light, in the middle of the stage. He explained the extraordinary nature of the Thicket Rain sword in a loud voice, and its power attracted waves of exclamations from the entire auction house. After all, this was different from the previous broken sect. Protecting spiritual weapon. This was a spiritual weapon that could be used by a golden core grand cultivator. In all of the 5 sects, the highest level of elders, even the sect leader, was only at the golden core stage. In other words, the Thicket Rain sword was currently the highest quality spiritual sword. It was even more precious than the worn-out sect. Protecting spiritual weapon. This treasure pavilion is actually hiding something. A spiritual sword that can withstand the spiritual energy of a golden core cultivator is not common. Su Lingyun said excitedly. Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun. He rarely came into contact with spiritual weapons. If it was alchemy, he might have some knowledge. However, he had never come into contact with weapon refinement. The grades of spiritual swords are determined by the level of spiritual energy they can withstand from cultivators. Those that Qi cultivators can use are called elementary spiritual swords. What a foundation establishment cultivator could use is called an intermediate spiritual sword. And a spiritual sword that could withstand the strength of a golden core grand cultivator, even if it was only an early stage golden core, could be considered a high grade spiritual sword. Even my master, the sect master of the Spirit Valley, could only use a high-grade spiritual sword. Su Lingyun looked at the Thicket Rain sword with burning eyes. If it wasn't for the fact that she had promised to help Zhou Yun bid for it, she would have wanted to exchange it for another spiritual sword. After listening to Su Lingyun's explanation, Zhou Yun also looked at the cluster Thicket Rain sword in excitement. If he could exchange it for this spiritual sword, then his sword intent would be greatly improved. Coupled with the mastery of the sword control technique, Zhou Yun believed that if he were to meet the spiritual corpses again, he would be able to kill them easily. This is... Zhou Yun felt his vision blur. A faint golden light did not shine on the Thicket Rain sword, but directly into his eyes. Zhou Yun covered his eyes. He realized that the golden light was coming from the black-robed man who was auctioning the Thicket Rain sword. Because everyone present was focused on the Thicket Rain sword, and the golden light was too dim, no one noticed it. Zhou Yun noticed that the black-robed man seemed to be saying something to him through the veil. However, because of the veil, Zhou Yun could not see the black-robed man's face, let alone the shape of his mouth. Don't bid on this sword. Suddenly, Zhou Yun heard a soft sound. He subconsciously gathered his spiritual energy and looked around. However, he realized that there was no one in the room. Zhou Yun looked at the black-robed man in the auction. He felt the voice coming from his mouth. What's wrong, junior brother Zhou Yun? Su Lingyun noticed Zhou Yun's strange behavior. she asked as she prepared to pull out her spiritual sword. The black-robed man at the auction just reminded me not to bid for this spiritual sword. Zhou Yun thought for a while and told Su Lingyun the truth. Don't bid for it. Su Lingyun squinted her eyes and looked at the auction list. There was still an unknown auction item. It looks like you've really received a lot of attention from Venerable Xuanling. The last auction item seems to be a spiritual sword. He doesn't want us to waste spiritual stones here. Su Lingyun understood what he meant. However, aren't you underestimating my wealth? Su Lingyun smiled disdainfully. Junior brother Zhou Yun, I'll bid for 2 spiritual swords. You can play with them on your left and right. How dare you look down on me, Su Lingyun? If you can't get it, I'll write my name backward. Su Lingyun took out a bunch of spiritual stones. The spiritual power contained in each of the spiritual stones made Zhou Yun's heart palpitate. Every single spiritual stone was overflowing with liquefied spiritual energy. Zhou Yun estimated that a single spiritual stone here was equivalent to 100 ordinary spiritual stones. Once again, he was amazed by Su Lingyun's wealth. However, Zhou Yun did not stop her. After all, he couldn't be happier to get another high-grade spiritual sword. Even the elders of the Spirit Valley only earned 100 spiritual stones a year. Some of the elders didn't even have a suitable spiritual sword. The auction for the Thicket Rain sword will begin now. The base price is 1,000 spiritual stones, and each increment must not be less than 100 spiritual stones. As the black-robed man began to explain, the entire auction house was in an uproar. 1,100, I'll pay 1,000 spiritual stones. 1,300. 1,500, 3,000. Poor people shouldn't come here to join in the fun. 5,000 spiritual stones. In just a few rounds, the price of the Thicket Rain sword rose steadily, heading straight for the 10,000 mark. Zhou Yun was speechless. A Golden Core Grand Cultivator's annual salary in the Spirit Valley was only 100 spiritual stones. Even with the sect's subsidy, he could only earn a few hundred spiritual stones a year at most. Judging from the price, this Thicket Rain sword was worth at least 10,000 spiritual stones. This was the earnings of a Golden Core Grand Cultivator for 100 years. 9,300 spiritual stones. I bid 9,400 spiritual stones. Everyone, I'm the direct disciple of the Heavenly Star Institute sect leader. I've taken a fancy to this sword, so please give me some face. A young man wearing a long green robe and waving a white feather fan stood out. He looked to be in his 20s or 30s, but he had a terrifying cultivation level of the late-stage foundation establishment. Bah! What is this Heavenly Star Institute? I'm the head disciple of the Myriad Flower School. I'll pay 10,000 spiritual stones. Little brat, if you're not convinced, come and fight with your grandpa. A brawny man with a huge iron pillar on his back stood up and sneered at the green-robed man without any restraint. His cultivation base had actually reached the terrifying perfected foundation establishment realm. Zhou Yun looked over and realized that the setting sun sword intent in his body had actually produced some resonance. Those two who claimed to be direct disciples and head disciples must have something similar to sword essence on their bodies, and it was not low either. At the very least, it was above the small success stage. Those are the disciples of the 5 sects of the same generation as me. We all entered the sect to cultivate 10 years ago. I didn't expect that I would stagnate for 5 years without breaking through to the Golden Core stage, but these few are still only in the foundation establishment stage. Su Lingyun explained to Zhou Yun with a disdainful expression. Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun. He was a little surprised because Su Lingyun had reached the perfected foundation establishment stage in just 5 years. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't break through her inner demons, Zhou Yun estimated that Su Lingyun would be the youngest Golden Core Grand Cultivator among the 5 sects. Everyone, why do you have to make the scene so stiff? How about this? I, the mighty Hellfire, will also join in the fun. I bid 10,100 spiritual stones, how about giving me some face? A young man said with a smile. To Zhou Yun's surprise, he discovered that the youth who called himself Hellfire was the Lai Yenshan that he had met before. That scammer who swindled a few spiritual stones out of his stall. Chapter 68. Fire Dragon Sword. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 68. Fire Dragon Sword. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. He actually has so many spiritual stones. Zhou Yun did not expect that the person who was full of lies just to cheat a few spiritual stones would actually be able to take out more than 10,000 spiritual stones in one go. One had to know that when one entered the treasure pavilion and raised their sign to auction, the treasure pavilion staff would confirm the assets before they were allowed to raise their sign. In other words, this person who called himself Hellfire really had more than 10,000 spiritual stones. Furthermore, Zhou Yun also discovered that the other party's aura was that of a perfected foundation establishment cultivator. Tisk, why isn't this lackey dead yet? With him messing things up, it looks like there's no chance for the Thicket Rain Sword. Su Lingyun suddenly gritted her teeth and said. It was obvious that she knew this person called Hellfire. Senior Sister Su, could it be that this Hellfire is very famous? Zhou Yun was a little curious. Don't talk to me about him. And I'm not called Su Lingyun anymore, I'm Yunlingsu. Su Lingyun turned her head away. She was even angrier. No wonder Venerable Xuanling told us not to bid for the Thicket Rain Sword. It turns out that this sword was used to deceive the world. Zhou Yun forced a smile. He didn't expect Su Lingyun to take his word seriously. However, compared to Su Lingyun and Hellfire, Zhou Yun was more concerned about the Thicket Rain Sword and the last auction item. The Thicket Rain Sword was a high-grade spiritual sword that could only be used by Golden Core Grand Cultivators, but it was actually used to deceive the world. Didn't that mean that the last auction item was of a higher quality than the Thicket Rain Sword? Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun. He was full of confidence before, but now he was a little worried. Did Su Lingyun really have enough spiritual stones to help him bid for the last spiritual sword? Don't worry. Su Lingyun pouted and waved her hand. The treasure pavilion doesn't allow temporary borrowing of spiritual stones. That is to say, unless you have all the spiritual stones on you, you can't auction off a chi item even if you are extremely rich. This is also a kind of marketing tactic. It's to make you afraid that you don't have enough spiritual stones, so you bring enough spiritual stones and spend them in the treasure pavilion in this colorful world. After all, the spiritual power of the heavens and earth is scarce, and there are very few good things, but there are many ordinary things. This is a method of small profit but quick turnover. In this entire auction, other than that undisciplined lackey, Hellfire, no one can be richer than me. Su Lingyun said heroically as she took out another bag of spiritual stones. Zhou Yun was dumbfounded. He was sure that each of the two bags was worth at least 10,000 spiritual stones. What is Su Lingyun's background? This was enough for 2 Golden Core Grand Cultivators to work for 100 years. However, Su Lingyun obviously didn't have the intention to explain. The entire auction was coming to an end. 13,000 spiritual stones. Ha ha ha, everyone, you should bring more spiritual stones when you come out to play. Hellfire sneered at the 2 disciples of the 5 sects. The Heavenly Star Institute's disciples, who had been sneering at them, were now full of anger. The burly man with the huge pillar also had blue veins on his face, and he almost took out his pillar to smash people. However, the auras of 5 Golden Core Grand Cultivators were released from time to time around the auction, which made the 2 brothers decide to be civilized people. Soon, the auction ended, and the Thicket Rain Sword was handed over to Hellfire. Zhou Yun looked to the side. They were not the only ones in the auction. There were 3 other private rooms in the surroundings. However, Just like Zhou Yun, the 3 private rooms did not initiate a starting bid at all. The 5 sects don't just have boorish men, they also have quite a few clever little girls. I'm guessing that the remaining 2 sects disciples are in the remaining private rooms. Su Lingyun supported her chin with her hand. She was a little curious as to why so many disciples of the 5 sects had come to this auction. One had to know that ever since she went into seclusion 5 years ago, the 5 sects' head disciples had never gathered again. Su Lingyun looked at Zhou Yun and touched the sword in her hand. She would never let anything happen to Zhou Yun because he was her only hope. Distinguished guests, the next item is the last one. This is an additional item that our treasure pavilion's venerable Xuanling has specially instructed us to add. The Thicket Rain sword was originally our special auction item this time. However, for the sake of a single person, Venerable Xuanling had especially added this item to the auction. The black-robed man said as he carried a box up. All the cultivators present were shocked by the black-robed man's words. Everyone in the 5 sects knew that the treasure pavilion's Venerable Xuanling was a legend. His existence was like a dream, not to mention whether he was a man or a woman, even if he really existed was another matter. Many factions were also curious as to whether or not Venerable Xuanling really existed. They had made all sorts of inquiries, but they could not find any traces of Venerable Xuanling. Even when the 5 sects made a move and asked, the treasure pavilion remained silent. They did not reveal or spontaneously mention anything about Venerable Xuanling. But now, in a small auction, the treasure pavilion had revealed the matter of the Venerable Xuanling for the first time. All the cultivators present were in an uproar. All of them were eager to buy the last treasure with all their wealth. There were even many cultivators who were already observing their surroundings to see if there was a mysterious person who could find Venerable Xuanling. However, there were also many people with bitter faces, including Hellfire. At this moment, he had a bitter expression on his face. Originally, he was holding the Thicket Rain sword excitedly. This was a high-grade spiritual sword that he had been waiting for a long time to obtain. It was a good sword that only appeared once in 100 years. However, after the black-robed man's words, he now felt that the Thicket Rain sword was such an obstacle. At this moment, Hellfire also reacted. He had been tricked. That last treasure was obviously a smokescreen deliberately released to prevent it from falling into his hands. Even this Thicket Rain sword had been used by Venerable Xuanling to help that heaven's favorite find out the upper limit of the cultivator's wealth. Who is it? The legendary Venerable Xuanling actually used such a method to help you. Hellfire squinted his eyes. He was starting to get curious. Who was the person that had received the favor of Venerable Xuanling? In the other 2 boxes, there was a young girl wearing a martial arts suit with her eyes covered with a red ribbon. It was a woman with a green veil and tender eyes. I've received a message this time, saying that something has happened at the auction this time. I believe that this message was intentionally released by Venerable Xuanling. The veiled young lady said softly. Around her, there were a total of 6 maids. They stood in the corner without saying a word, as if they were lifeless puppets. I smelled a strange smell. I didn't expect that after being drawn here, I would actually discover the traces of the legendary Venerable Xuanling. This is really interesting. The blindfolded young girl sniffed, and the corners of her mouth suddenly curved up. Then, this is the last auction item. It's also an auction item that Venerable Xuanling has specially sent over. The black-robed man lifted the item. It was a red spiritual sword with a flame mark on its body. It's called Fire Dragon Sword, a top-notch spiritual sword that can really withstand the spiritual power of a late-stage golden core. Chapter 69. Enlightenment on the Spot. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 69. Enlightenment on the Spot. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio, it's the well-known Fire Dragon Sword, a top-notch spiritual sword that can really withstand the spiritual energy of late-stage golden core. As the black-robed man's voice sounded, the entire auction house fell into silence. No one dared to make a sound. They even subconsciously held their breath. Like everyone else, Zhou Yun's gaze fell on the fire dragon's spiritual sword. The sword body was red all over, and the flame patterns on it vaguely transformed into the shape of a true dragon that soared high up into the highest of the heavens. Just a glance at it would make one's body feel hot. It was as if countless flames were burning in the body. The top-notch spiritual sword. Su Lingyun seemed to have wanted to say something, but seeing Zhou Yun there, she held back her words. This is a real spiritual sword. Compared to it, the spiritual sword in my hand is just a piece of scrap metal. This spiritual sword could be used as a sect-protecting spiritual weapon. Moreover, it's one of the best sect-protecting spiritual weapons. Su Lingyun was going crazy. Where did Treasure Pavilion get its foundation from? It actually took out a top-notch spiritual weapon that was rarely found in the 5 sections. Some sects even only had one such weapon. Su Lingyun couldn't figure it out. Wasn't the Treasure Pavilion a force that was only used for trading? Moreover, they had to rely on the 5 sects to open the Treasure Pavilion here. What made it put such a good spiritual weapon up for auction? How did it have such a good spiritual weapon? The offensive spiritual weapon was the most valuable among all spiritual weapons, followed by the defensive spiritual weapons. Su Lingyun's were envious. Looking at the fire dragon spiritual sword, Zhou Yun felt the setting sun sword intent in his body surging continuously. The setting sun sword intent seemed to be drawn out by the fire dragon sword as it continuously revolved around Zhou Yun. For a moment Zhou Yun seemed to have resonated with the fire dragon sword. He was unconsciously releasing the setting sun sword intent. The intense sword energy of the setting sun sword intent began to emit from Zhou Yun's body and spread throughout the entire private room. Furthermore, as Zhou Yun and the fire dragon sword kept looking at each other, Zhou Yun entered the enlightenment state. This time, without the help of the system, Zhou Yun entered the enlightenment state on his own for the first time. He felt his body was extremely burning hot. The setting sun sword intent was constantly flourishing, burning, and growing. Just as Zhou Yun felt, the setting sun sword intent on his body also kept burning. It became hotter, more intense, and even more terrifying. Su Lingyun by the side was dumbfounded. She remained on the spot without any movement until her skin was pierced by the intense setting sun sword intent. It was only after feeling the pain that she came back to her senses. While Su Lingyun secretly cursed Zhou Yun for his perverted talent, she slowly moved toward the surrounding of the private room. She didn't want to interrupt Zhou Yun's enlightenment, but the setting sun sword intent on Zhou Yun's body had become extremely ferocious. Even she could not perfectly suppress Zhou Yun's aura. This caused Zhou Yun, who was in his enlightenment, to release his terrifying setting sun sword intent throughout the entire auction. It swept across the entire place and enveloped everyone's head with the terrifying sword intent. What kind of sword intent is this? Why is it so terrifying? Even the sword in my hand is shaking. A cultivator holding a sword looked at the spiritual sword in his hand in disbelief. Under Zhou Yun's setting sun sword intent, he even began to think that it was not suitable for him to hold a sword. What a terrifying sword intent! Could this be the great stage of sword intent? Who in the private room is the Golden Core Senior? The chief of the Myriad Flower School waved his fan with a solemn expression. You bookworm! This is not the great stage of sword intent. This Golden Core Senior has probably seen the fire dragon sword and obtained the opportunity. He is now breaking through to the legendary perfection of sword intent. The brawny man carrying the pillar suddenly said. He was extremely shocked. Sword cultivators were the most aggressive in offense in the world, and sword intent was the most difficult to comprehend. An ordinary golden core cultivator with moderate stage sword intent had been considered an expert. For the golden core cultivator with the great stage of sword intent, even the five sects would treat him with courtesy. But now, he could witness a golden core grand cultivator comprehending the perfection of sword intent. He quickly closed his eyes and carefully sensed the transformation of Zhou Yun's sword intent. Many of the cultivators present were unwilling to waste this rare opportunity. They all closed their eyes to sense Zhou Yun's transformation. Although many of them did not cultivate the way of the sword, the origin of all laws was similar. If they comprehended it seriously, it might be beneficial for them in breaking through their own path in the future. At this moment, no one actually paid attention to the Fire Dragon Sword, a precious top-notch spiritual sword that could be used as the legacy magic item of the 5 great sections. Instead, they were all sitting cross-legged in front of Zhou Yun's private room comprehending the sword intent. Even the 5 golden core cultivators who were originally guarding by the side also flew to nearby Zhou Yun's private room and sat down cross-legged. They released a faint spiritual energy to protect Zhou Yun. At the same time, they also comprehend the transformation process of the perfection of sword intent. Zhou Yun did not know what the outside world had become because of his sudden enlightenment. At this moment, he was carefully comprehending the transformation of his setting sun sword intent. In Zhou Yun's perception, the originally huge setting sun in the sky seemed to have changed with a trace of sadness. In the sky full of redness, the cool atmosphere of the setting sun was suddenly burned by the scorching heat. The setting sun became bigger and bigger. Even the huge setting sun started to move up and down. Zhou Yun could feel a burst of vitality from the setting sun. Boom! Finally, the setting sun grew bigger and bigger, and the flames around it became more and more terrifying and violent. Finally, in an instant, Zhou Yun saw the huge setting sun explode. A glass-like body fire dragon was born from the huge setting sun. Zhou Yun's eyes opened suddenly. His eyes were glowing red. The terrifying fire sword intent spread all over his body, and the terrifying temperature in the room swirled and evaporated. The entire room was as if submerged in lava. What was even more terrifying was that in the lava-like temperature, there was an extremely intense sword energy. It was as if just a ray of the sword energy could split the world. Zhou Yun heaved a sigh of relief. He felt as if a long time had passed, but at the same time it was like just an instant, his enlightenment had ended. My sword intent has finally broken through to the great stage and reached perfection. Zhou Yun felt the sword intent on his body. He could not believe it. The setting sun sword intent had disappeared. No, it had transformed into an even more terrifying fire sword intent. The fire sword intent. It looks like I have good compatibility with the fire dragon sword. I have comprehended the fire sword intent before I even obtained the fire dragon sword. While Zhou Yun was satisfied with his advancement, he also felt a wave of fear. Venerable Xuanling could actually find a top-notch spiritual sword that was so compatible with him. Didn't that mean he still had several top-notch spiritual weapons in his hands? Zhou Yun looked at the bag that Venerable Xuanling had given to him. There was also a spiritual weapon inside. The energy it emitted was actually comparable to the fire dragon sword. It was also a top-notch spiritual weapon. Congratulations to this cultivator for comprehending the perfection of sword intent. Let's continue with the auction. The black-robed man's words drew back the attention of everyone present. Chapter 70. The Domineering Su Lingyun. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 70. The Domineering Su Lingyun. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. The black-robed man's words drew the attention of all the cultivators back to the auction. However, none of the cultivators' gazes left the private room that Zhou Yun was in. They cupped their fists gratefully in the direction of Zhou Yun. Enlightenment was not something that all cultivators could have. Some cultivators could not even have enlightenment for once in their entire lifetime. This time, Zhou Yun's enlightenment did not only allow him to transform his setting sun sword intent into the fire sword intent, but it also benefited the surrounding cultivators with such a large scale transformation. It could be said that all the cultivators present had half of the enlightenment. Therefore, all the cultivators present were grateful to this mysterious golden core grand cultivator. Now, even with just one finger, I can destroy the 5 spiritual corpses previously. Zhou Yun's finger moved slightly and a wisp of fire sword intent gathered at the tip of his finger. It condensed and did not dissipate. With a light stroke, even the air was burned and deformed. Now, Zhou Yun was even more looking forward to the soaring of his combat strength after he obtained the fire dragon sword. Therefore, Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun, but only to realize she was looking at him as if she had seen a ghost. Junior brother Zhou Yun, you're not just a disgusting genius. Even I'm starting to admire you. What kind of brain do you have? Are you taking enlightenment as drinking water, and enlighten as and when you wish? Su Lingyun was jealous. This was the first time she had such a feeling. When she was facing the other 4 sects, she had punched the Myriad Flower School, kicked the Cherishing Jade sect, sent the Heavenly Star Institute flying with a sneeze, and frightened the Autumn Path School with a look. However, she had never been so glorious back then. Being able to comprehend the perfection of sword intent among thousands of cultivators, Zhou Yun would definitely become a legend when the news spread. Not only that, it was that kind that would not be forgotten. TSK. I originally planned to pocket this fire dragon sword and give you my spiritual sword. However, since you've comprehended the perfection of fire sword intent, I can't be so black-hearted, Su Lingyun said with a look of pity. Zhou Yun's face turned black. He did not expect Su Lingyun to have such a thought. If he had not had the enlightenment, the fire dragon sword that was specially prepared for him by Venerable Xuanling would have been stolen. Alright, I'm afraid the people below are going to have a big fight with this auction. Looking at the 2 bags of spiritual stones on the table, Su Lingyun gritted her teeth and searched all over her body for a long time before she took out another bag of spiritual stones. These guys won't stop bidding just because of Venerable Xuanling. They might even pawn everything they have to continue bidding for the top-notch spiritual weapon. Su Lingyun said seriously. Although Treasure Pavilion did not allow borrowing money at the last minute, they could use the treasures they have as collateral. However, they would only buy them at half the market price. Although many people hated this, they had no choice but to accept it. After all, there were times when the treasures in an auction were too rare. For example, the fire dragon sword. Zhou Yun looked at Su Lingyun. He gritted his teeth and took out all his spiritual stones. He had a total of 1,500 spiritual stones and a spiritual meal token. He had earned 500 spiritual stones by selling wearily the perfect tier pills that he emptied the wallets of several alchemy elders. As for the 1,000 spiritual stones and the spiritual meal token, they were all given by the sect leader, Ling Qingyun. Zhou Yun pushed all his assets to Su Lingyun. Originally, he had thought that Su Lingyun would not mind and accept it. However, he did not expect Su Lingyun to look at him with a cold gaze. Who are you looking down on? If I can't win the bid for the fire dragon sword today, I'll reverse my name. Su Lingyun's mouth was covered by Zhou Yun before she could finish her sentence. If the auction didn't work again, Su Lingyun, who was now Yunlingsu, wouldn't the name change back again? Just as Zhou Yun stopped Su Lingyun from speaking, the auction resumed. The starting price of the top-notch spiritual weapon, the fire dragon sword, is 15,000 spiritual stones. Each increment must be no less than 1,000 spiritual stones. The black-robed man's words made many people who had intended to bid draw in a cold breath. The starting price of the fire dragon sword had reached a terrifying 15,000 spiritual stones. How long would it take for a golden core grand cultivator to sell himself in order to buy one? The 5 Guardian Golden Core Grand Cultivators shook their heads helplessly when they heard the price. It was because they were also qualified to bid. However, they realized that even if they sold themselves for hundreds of years, it might not even be enough for one auction. D*M*. If I didn't buy the Thicket Rain sword, I would have gotten the Fire Dragon sword this time. Hellfire clenched his teeth as he held on to the Thicket Rain sword. For the first time, he felt that obtaining a high-grade spiritual sword was such a terrible thing. To find the treasure pavilion's explosive point, he had brought all his assets over and waited for several years. He did not expect to have been cheated. 16,000 spiritual stones. In the private room, the veiled woman spoke softly. Her gentle voice spread throughout the auction house, making everyone feel warm in their hearts. 18,000 spiritual stones, the blindfolded ribbon wearing girl said. Although she didn't use a sword, it was a rare opportunity for her to bring a sect-protecting spiritual weapon to the sect. 20,000 spiritual stones. I'll pawn my spiritual sword. It's worth at least 5,000 spiritual stones, the young man who was fanning said through gritted teeth. He had originally bought Luther's sword for 10,000 spirit stones, but now he had to pawn it at half price. He had gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. After 2 consecutive bids, everyone in the auction realized that the wealth they had been so proud of was actually so vulnerable in front of the chief disciples of the 5 sections. The cultivators present all kept their mouths shut. It was better if this top-notch spiritual weapon fell into the hands of one of the 5 sections. At the very least, there wouldn't be any turmoil of a 6th sect appearing to fight over this resource that had been scarce. Just as all the cultivators were wondering which sect this top-notch spiritual sword would end up in, a clear female voice suddenly sounded in the auction. Long time no see, trash. I didn't expect you all to still be at the Foundation establishment after 5 years. How embarrassing. Su Lingyun suddenly opened her mouth. Her voice was dragged by spiritual energy and echoed throughout the auction. I'm not going to waste my time with you, juniors. I'll set a fixed price of 25,000 spiritual stones. Come for those who can keep up. Those who can't, please remember it. We'll have a contest in the 5 sects tournament. Su Lingyun said with a smile. It was clear that with just the voice, all the cultivators present seemed to be able to see the expression on Su Lingyun's face that deserved a beating. Su Lingyun. You be *starred. You've actually come out of seclusion. The veiled woman's pupils suddenly shrank, and she couldn't even maintain her gentle voice as she shouted in surprise. Tisk, sure enough. I knew it wouldn't be so easy. Since we're all here, Spirit Valley surely won't miss it. The brawny man with the pillar on his back scratched his head and sat down, as if afraid of something. The scene suddenly fell silent. After hearing Su Lingyun's voice, the originally arrogant chief disciples of the 4 sects no longer say anything else. They even didn't intend to bid anymore. The black-robed man's hammer fell. The Fire Dragon sword was successfully bidden at the price of 25,000 spiritual stones. Congratulations to the guest in room number 1. As the black-robed man spoke, he suddenly paused. Venerable Xuanling left a message. He's very pleased that you're able to comprehend the perfection of sword intent at the early stage Foundation establishment. He's looking forward to you breaking through to the Golden Core stage within a year. By then, he'll come to see you again. After the black-robed man finished speaking, the entire auction house was in an uproar. They all looked at Zhou Yun's private room in shock. That Golden Core Grand Cultivator who had comprehended the perfection of sword intent was only in the early stage Foundation establishment.